Thanks for checking out Inside the Huddle with Three Rivers FCA. Here are your hosts, Andrew Hofer and Tom Sigel.
Well, welcome into Inside the Huddle with Three Rivers FCA for this episode. We're excited to continue a topic that we started last week. One of my former assistant coaches, Damon Colvin, came on and talked about our relationship, and head coach, assistant coach for 20 years, and shared a few stories and some laughs. But we also really hit on the accountability component of the relationships and the role that the assistant coach can play in that. And he brought up, relationships and how that builds that trust among coaches. But there were times where, yes, he kind of had to touch base on a few things to, I don't want to say put me in check. It wasn't that bad, but sometimes we need that. And so I thought that there was some good discussion. So that topic we're going to continue here in episode 7 this week. And we're going to get former assistant and co-coach, I guess, in some respects, coaching colleague, I should say, of Andrew's. So Andrew, you want to kind of explain the relationship that you have with
this week we have Dustin Murray on from Mercer County High School. He's the current athletic director there and the head softball coach. But Dustin was one of my assistant football coaches for 7 years. So a lot of ups and downs, and you get to know each other pretty well in the course of 7 years. And so being able to talk about what the assistant coach's role is, why it's so important, and then the accountability from assistant to head coach and vice versa, I think is vital for a program's success. So we're excited to have Coach Murray on and to hear his perspective and hear some of his thoughts here as we continue to dive into assistant coaches and why they are so important and vital to the success of a program. So coming up will be Dustin Murray from Mercer County High School. Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is Andrew Hofer, Area Director for Three Rivers FCA, joined by Field Ambassador Tom Sigel. And this week, we're really excited to bring in Dustin Murray. He is the athletic director and the head softball coach at Mercer County High School. So welcome in, Coach Murray.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Looking forward to being on. I've watched all your podcasts now. I think the Coach Aaron one, I don't know if anybody can top that one, really. He's a fantastic guy, but I just hope that I can be a speck of what his was.
Oh, I'm sure you will. And maybe we'll get treated to some stories for, that you guys have gone through. I think Damon and I last week kind of got into some. We didn't share everything, but maybe it was enjoyable. Maybe it wasn't for people, but
yeah. So I didn't mention it, but Coach Murray was one of my assistant coaches for 7 years when I was at Mercer County as the head football coach, and knows the ups and downs, right? So a lot of when you're working as a coaching staff, you get to see all the good, all the bad, and you do it together and serving together. So I was able to coach with Dustin for a long time. So happy to hear his perspective today.
Yeah, definitely. So, Coach, what can you kind of share your coaching journey, or even further back before you were coaching, athletic background? Obviously it's real special to get invited on this podcast, so you must be some great experiences there.
Yeah. So, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and Lisle, played football, baseball. I went to Monmouth College to play baseball. In my senior year, they tell me, hey, you can't play baseball. You got to student teach because the math department only allowed it in the spring. So kind of allowed me to student teach here up at Mercer County. But I'll be honest with you, in that fall, I coached football at Monmouth Roseville under Kurt Crum for a year, and met the cheerleading coach. And to be honest with you, now, however many years later, I think 13 years later, we've been married and got 3 kids. So met her there, but I got a job at Mercer County then after I student taught here. I coached baseball when I first started here, but then I'll be honest, got hired here with football, and football is pretty intensive at Mercer County by Nat Zunkel, and was fortunate to be on a great staff there, a bunch of good guys, and we had a bunch of talent. And in 2012, we were able to win the state title. Also coached baseball during that time. And then, my wife, we had some kids, and my wife said, hey, something's got to give. And so I said, you know what? I love football. I kept with football. I gave up baseball for a year. And then, I think in that transition, Coach Hofer came. We had hired a new softball coach. He said, hey, you know anything about softball? You got daughters? And I said, no, but I'd be willing to learn. And now, under her tenure, I was in the JV head coach, and now I've been the varsity head softball coach. Coached with Coach Hofer for a long time while he was here, his whole tenure. And then, obviously when Coach Hofer left, I stepped into the AD role that he was in. And ultimately, I decided that I would step away from football. I think that step away is temporary step away, maybe. If I convince my wife to let me come back on some Friday nights, because if you've ever watched a Mercer County football,
you heard it here first.
Yeah. If you've ever watched a Mercer County football game, I'm kind of pacing the sidelines still. I've got that old football coach in me. So, love the journey. There's been a lot of athletes that I've had the opportunity to work with who not only have I hope they've grown from me, but I think I've grown from them. And a lot of good coaches that I've worked with, seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly, and some coaches telling me, hey, you've got to change. And honestly, Coach Hofer was probably one of the bigger influences in me maturing as a young coach, and taking that next step. Because I know nobody will believe this if they listen to it. I might have been a little bit of a hothead back in the day, and I remember Coach Hofer's one big thing when he came. He said, if I'm going to yell, there's going to be a reason, and the kids are going to remember it, because I was probably one of those, I was yelling every day, and Andrew kind of said that, and it made me think like, okay, if we're going to get like that, it's got to mean something. And I think maybe in our time, I heard Andrew yell about 2 or 3 times, and one of them might've probably been directed at me for calling a play action hitch. And all of a sudden the kid from Clifton Central is going 40 yards the other way for a touchdown.
Yeah, I'm having a good day. Why are you going to bring that up, Coach? Come on.
Or, hey, just to start it off, so everybody's got context. When we kicked the ball off that day, it went backwards. So that was just that whole day. It was. I hate going to Clifton Central, and Clifton Central people, I like them, but I hate going to that place.
Yeah. So changing gears on you a little bit, part of the reason that are part of our theme over the last couple of weeks has really been talking about assistant coaches. I think assistant coaches are vital to a program's success, and you see different coaches come in with different strengths, and but it's been really good to touch base on that. In your opinion, why do you think assistant coaches are so important to a program's overall success?
I think you're only as good as your assistants. I know softball wise, I've got 3 assistants that help me out, and there's only so much a head coach can see and manage. And I think an assistant coach, their role is to serve the coach and serve the program. And I think they can see the little nuances, and honestly, they can work with the kids a little bit better at times, just because you're the head coach. Everybody looks up to you, and you've got all the media relationships. But assistants, I think an assistant needs to be loyal and knowledgeable. And that's one thing that I always tried to encompass as an assistant, that I was going to be as loyal as I could be to my head coach. And I was going to be as knowledgeable about what they wanted me to be as knowledgeable as I could about. And supporting that role, just like a marriage where, cause my wife always joked that, oh, is those your boyfriends calling you? Like, no, it's just the coaches text about stuff. And so, a head coach and his assistants are almost like a family unit, where they need to be able to say anything that they can to each other and know that we might disagree, but at the end of the day, we've got to go forward. And I will say, it's been on a lot of staffs I've been on. It's one of those things, you may disagree with a head coach, and the head coach may disagree with an assistant, but you never do it in front of kids. When we're out with the kids together, we're one united front, we're together. You're never going to show students and athletes, that disagreement.
Yeah. We kind of touched on one thing I was going to ask. Andrew, do you have something to add there?
Yeah, I think part of the when you talk about that, like everyone's moving in the same direction. I've always joked that like people kind of see the 1%. And so when you're on the court or on the field or wherever it might be, that's the time that's open to the public. That's what people really see and gets a lot of publicity, and rightfully so, because it's the competition piece of it. But that's just a small fraction of percentage that's going on there. And so when you're a coaching staff, you got to be pulling in the same direction because you're together and working on that other 99%, all the things that are going into building up for that 1%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was watching a game last night where I saw the head coach turn around and bark at the bench when something didn't go right, and yeah, to the general public, oh my.
Mm-hmm. With Coach Hofer's staff, we met on Sundays after church. We'd meet about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and that was our time that we would get everybody's heads out, and everybody would, disagree, and we'd have the whiteboard. We'd be drawing things up. But then by Monday afternoon, when we were going to talk to the kids, we were all on the same page. This is our game plan. This is what we want to do going forward.
Yeah. Well, you kind of touched on what that how you as an assistant felt like you could help the head coach out and help the program. Was there some advice that you got as you went into coaching as an assistant, or even along those lines, things that you learned that you might give advice to some young coaches down the road?
Mm-hmm. I think some of the best I got advice was actually Brian Dennison. One of my first years as an assistant.
Mm-hmm.
He was, I was kind of young and exuberant and had all these ideas. And Brian said, "Hey, just take a minute and just listen." A good assistant listens, and I think that was one of the best things for me to hear was, "Hey, just be quiet and just listen and take it all in." And I think that helped me from the start. If I could give advice, it'd say, "Hey, don't be like I was when I first started out." Um, they're kids, they're humans. And maybe we were coached differently when we were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe coaches were a little bit harder on us, but it was also a different time. And now, the softball girls, for me, if I'm going to yell at a softball practice, something bad has had to happen and the girls are shocked, because we're laughing, we're joking, but we're serious about what we need to do. And the girls will hear stories from people, "Oh, when you coach football," and they're like, "That's not coach, he's different." And I've matured, I've grown up, I've had kids. I think that's humbled me. And you just, so if I can give any assistant, a young assistant, some advice, it's listen to your head coach, respect your head coach, and just listen, and take things in like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like that. And I think, we live in a society where it's very like everyone feels like they need to speak their piece, but there's moments like when you're an assistant coach and doing that too, and before becoming a head coach, like, I think most head coaches are open to listening to the assistants, but ultimately, like, it goes both ways. Like you've got to be able to listen to not only your head coach, but the other assistants and the athletes.
Mhm.
Listen to them, and that can help influence and guide your coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. As a head coach, you're only as good as your assistants. As an assistant coach, you're only as good as your head coach. And so just if you can listen and share those ideas and that, and I felt like when I worked for Andrew, it was always an open book. He was willing to, I don't know how many times we'd get up at school, we'd come to school at 6 o'clock on a Friday morning just to talk ball. And some of those times were some of the best times. You just chalk talked. We'd get out the whiteboard, and I'm sure Coach Sigel, you've done this at times with basketball. You
Mm-hmm.
just get on the chalk talk and start playing around and say, "Okay, I know for us for football, okay, what's the outside linebacker going to do here?" And you'd be drawing it up on the whiteboard. Some of those are the best times, that we've had. Just you're not arguing, but you're challenging each other. And I think that's what you need to grow, not only as a person, as a human, as a Christian. When you get challenged about something, that's where growth comes from.
Yeah.
I know that, you know, uh, I went through some things in life before I went to college about, challenging my faith and that type of stuff. But, I think since we've moved to Aledo and we became a member of a good church, I was challenged, to become a better Christian, and I'm still falling short every day. But I think, just like we're challenged to become better Christians, we got to challenge as a head coach, we've got to challenge our assistants to become better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And, we talk a lot of it within FCA about how coaching is a ministry. And I don't think it's commonly perceived that way within the public, but I really think it is. And I think it's probably one of the most impactful ministries there are for student athletes. There's so many students that are participating in sports, whether it be at the campus level or at the travel level. But why do you think coaching is one of the more impactful ministries for our students, especially in the current society and landscape?
I think coaching is so impactful because you're not a student's parents typically, because we know with our own kids that they put up barriers right away. Oh, you're mom and dad, we can't listen to you. I think it's one of those things that a coach can impact a player just by talking to them, just by being their friend. I want to say that I think coaching is the most powerful thing because you're spending so much time with that student athlete. You're connecting with them in something typically they really enjoy. And so with all that time and that emotion and that struggle that you're putting in, especially when you perform well on a softball game, on a baseball game, on a basketball game, when you perform well, you become bonded a little bit more through wins and losses. I mean, there's times, I think back to when we got beat by Clifton Central and way back when in 2019, just giving one of the young men a hug off the field, because that time we had spent so much time together for the last 4 years that you develop those relationships. And I think, part of ministry is developing those relationships with people.
Yeah, I mean, sports are incredibly relational. You spend so much time together. You're pouring into them like for a common goal.
Mhm.
But then for us as coaches, because of that, because of the relationships that are built, you're able to go to another level. You're able to go a step further. And that's where it's not only are we trying to develop them on the court or field or wherever it might be, we're trying to develop them athletically, but more importantly, we're trying to develop them as young men, young women, and trying to help, ultimately help them through their spirituality and leading them to Christ.
Yeah, and the different impacts that coaching staffs have can be on each other. I mean, we've been talking about that throughout this episode and the last one, and accountability has kind of been the theme there
Mhm.
because you mentioned those Friday morning chalk talks, and one of the accountability ones came up to me because yes, give me a whiteboard or used to keep a little notepad next to the bed because at 2 o'clock in the morning or something, some idea comes up and I swear sometimes, well, yeah, this play works because I was half asleep and we have 6 guys on offense. No wonder somebody's going to be open when we run this. But I would be held accountable when we would be in those little sessions that they would say, well, what are we taking out? Because we're getting too much stuff. This is good. And they would have to kind of call me. And I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right. The playbook's getting a little too thick here in January. So, some of those are accountability, situations, but sometimes it's deeper. Um, hey, you need to go talk to that kid because of how you talk, you yelled at him or maybe somebody on staff or whatever. And this is where maybe it comes into some stories between you guys. I don't know, but how do you see that?
Mhm.
Obviously being a head coach, but also that role as assistant having to kind of step up and sometimes hold other coaches or especially the head coach accountable.
Yeah, I know for me, oh, my office, I haven't moved long enough, so my office light turned on. Um, I know for me as a head coach, I've had to have that hard conversation with, hey, what you just said in our team huddle wasn't acceptable. You need to, and do change that or do that. And as the head coach, it's your job um to monitor all sports of the program, whether you've got somebody coaching first base you don't agree with, hey, we're getting too aggressive rounding doubles, or in our case, Andrew is the head coach. I was calling offense for a couple years, and it just wasn't. I didn't have the knack. It just wasn't working. And so Andrew and I had to have, Andrew's one of my best friends, and we had to have that hard conversation where, Andrew said, hey, we're going to go in a different direction of calling offense. And I'll be honest with you, I walked out a little upset. And then I thought to myself, it was kind of like a weight off my shoulders, just because I wasn't good at it at that time. I'd love to another crack at it some other day, maybe down the road. But, I think that helped me grow so much as a coach. And then honestly, Andrew started calling offense the next year, and I felt like I got better as an assistant because I knew what he was going through calling plays, but then I also knew what he needed and that support. So it might have been one of the hardest conversations Andrew and I had to have together, but I think it probably was the best conversation because it helped the general direction going forward the entire time. And I enjoyed my time calling offense, but it wasn't my knack. If anybody knows my knack, I love special teams, and Coach Hofer and I will still send stuff on Twitter and X to each other. Hey, look at this sweet kick return or that. And we're still doing it. And he's not the head coach here anymore. And I'm not even coaching football, but I think my wife still goes nuts when I'm sitting over here going, okay, or I'll text him, hey, did you see the play in that game? We could have run that out of our red open look, and him and I still go back to this day. Hey, we could have run this play off of this. So.
No, and you guys obviously must have had a really good relationship built at that point where you could trust him that you could say things and vice versa, that was going to be taken that way. So, that's a special bond.
Absolutely. Well, we had that bond, I think, from the start. I know our families were super close. We invited the Hofers over. We helped them move in. If anybody knows the story, we had to move our weight room out of the high school. The first year Andrew was there, we used the moving truck. Him and his wife, Katie, moved from Polo. We had to load the moving truck up with all the weight room equipment and move it across the street. So there's so many stories we could go back and reminisce about, good, bad, ugly, shoveling the football field on Halloween night at 11 o'clock to get it ready for a playoff game the following day.
So you bring up an interesting dynamic there, because I think their accountability from head coach to assistant coach is really important. And I think it goes both ways too, and from assistant coach to head coach too. And sometimes it might be like, hey, you got after this kid too much, or, whatever you're doing, like whether it's something to do with communication, whether it's something to do schematically or relationally, whatever you're doing, like it's not working. Like we need to examine this. And so I think it's important. It goes both ways. And, having that relationship allows for more open accountability, which Damon pointed out last week. The better relationship you have and the more relational you are as a staff, the more open on accountability you can be, which then allows you to, really dive in and, be a fixer, but also at the same time, make sure everyone's pulling in the same direction.
Well, that's what I didn't know. Do you have a perspective on that story then, Andrew? Because I saw you nodding that it is difficult. We had at our coaches huddle this morning, we got into this a little bit, this topic, and everybody enjoyed it. And it kind of came up the first time as a young assistant where I kind of had to speak up and share what I thought. I didn't know how it was going to get taken, but some of that's the tact that you use as well can help it be received a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, as far as a specific story, I mean, there's not one that jumps to mind right away, but I do know that not only Dustin, but I've had other assistant coaches, whether at Mercer County or Polo, or even being an assistant at Deer Creek Mackinac, there's times where if your relationship is good enough, you're able to go and have those hard conversations. So when Dustin and I were able to have those hard conversations, if we didn't have that relational foundation, that would have been impossible. It probably would have been more so confrontational then it would be that, hey, this is good for all of us. Let's talk through it. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but let's work on this together. And because of that relational foundation, we were able to do that as coaches on the same program.
Well, I guess coaching as an AD, I mean, you now have that with the head coaches at each sport. Has to be real important because, open door policy, that's a phrase that gets tossed around a lot that isn't always true. Open door policy, come on in. So yeah, exactly. So yeah, you have to have that, but I would assume that, yeah, you want those coaches of their sport to be able to come in and speak up if they feel like they deserve something or they have that major question or support from you with a parent situation.
Yeah, I want to let my note, I almost want to tell my head coaches sometimes, look, I can almost be another assistant in your program to help support you. I know I'm the athletic director and I'm supposed to come from the top, but I'm there to support them and I've got an open door, but if it's shut, don't come in. We'll talk about it another time.
Right.
But no, giving that support is huge. And, being able to quote unquote, have someone's back and be loyal, to them is extremely important, and having those relationships. I also think about another story. I didn't know, we meet Andrew, he comes for the summer, we're just getting to meet each other. We're still in that learning stage. And I had to call Andrew on a Saturday morning and say, hey, I'm not going to make this 7-on-7 today. And he's like, well, you're not going to come to the 7-on-7. I think we were going to Washington. I said, no, my wife's in the hospital. We're going to have a baby, and just knowing that he was going to be like, absolutely, go ahead. No big deal. That was tremendous having that. But no, as a head coach, as an AD, you have to have that policy and supporting each other and doing that, and going from there. And I felt that Andrew and I could support each other to the end of the earth. We've, I think, developed that relationship that, I think is unbreakable.
It's great to hear.
So, well, I'm glad I'm not the coach that was going to get after you for going to the birth of your child, Coach.
Right.
So.
Hey, and I'm always here to support Andrew, even when he calls me on a Saturday morning. We're going for a Saturday practice. And he's like, I can't move. I can't drive. Back had thrown out. So here we get him in my truck and we drive him over to practice. And I think he kind of like walked around like a dinosaur that day, but he made it just because he goes, I can't drive. I can't do anything. I'm like, well, here, I'll be there for you.
Yeah, I wasn't supposed to be on my feet that day, but practice called.
But if Katie sees this or asks, he sat in the chair the entire time.
Yeah.
That's right. So,
yeah.
Well, Coach, appreciate you joining us and being able to share some perspective. Not only, I mean, it's unique perspective because you have years of experience being an assistant. Now you've got years of experience being a head coach, and then also from the administrative side with athletic director. So, thank you for sharing your perspectives and some stories and some memories. And always appreciate you and I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Yep. Appreciate both of you. I enjoy this podcast. Keep it going. Don't let the dream die. It's good. It's fun to watch. I sit and listen in my office while I'm working in the afternoon. So keep it rolling.
They're still letting us continue on.
Yeah, we're being carried by each guest. So we really appreciate you coming on, getting a chance to get to know you a little bit better, and keep doing great things down there at Mercer County. We appreciate you.
All right. Hey, appreciate it, guys. Thanks very much.
All right. Yep. Thanks, Coach. Well, it was nice to have Coach Murray on and be able to really dive into a mini series here about assistant coaches and kind of our burning question over the last couple of weeks had to do with accountability from assistant coach to head coach and vice versa. And just really good to hear both Coach Murray's point of view and then last week with Coach Colvin's. And I know that over the years, I've had so many really good assistants and I'm still close with many of them today, and they're so vital to the success of a program. And then being an assistant in the past too, I think you learn a lot about what the head coach does, what the head coach needs, and how you can support that. And I know you and I were talking to some coaches this morning about like what makes a good assistant.
Hmm.
And I think Coach Murray said about like good assistant coaches are worth their weight in gold because they can really change not only a program but how how successful the head coach is, how successful the team is, and they really can change the direction of a program.
Yeah, and I think that especially a staff, when you establish some continuity, that those assistant, not only are you building relationships if you stay together for 4, 5, 10 years down the road, there's consistency with what you're teaching, the system, you're building relationships. But also, I think that when you have those situations, you have assistant coaches that are comfortable, they're confident in their role, um, not after your job. You hope that they go start their own programs. I think that's always great to see that, coaching tree out there, but also that, hey, I love what I'm doing. I love being on this staff in this role. And, um, they give all they have. And like you said, that's essential. And I've been fortunate as well to, um, basically at everywhere I've been and um, throughout the 10 years to have assistants that we were close and um, had those moments where we had those tough conversations or we didn't agree, but we had built those relationships to be able to get through that and understand that we had a common goal.
Well, and Coach Murray mentioned it too, like being loyal as an assistant coach and is so incredibly important just because how easy is it? And it's going to happen. Like you're going to get someone from the outside noise. They're going to come talk to you and be like, well,
Hmm.
if you were in charge, would you have done this? Or maybe like you should talk to him about doing it or her about doing this. And so it's easy to give in to that temptation to be like, you know what, I would do it this way. But when you are loyal, you're coming in with a plan together, and you might not always like might not always agree as you're making the plan, but when the plan is done, like we're all on the same mission, we're all on the same path, we're all on this same boat together, and that is a key piece of a staff, because if you're not doing that, then you've got anchors or pieces that are kind of pulling weight away from the mission, and you don't want to be that guy or that gal doing that.
Yeah. And Um, sometimes I would jokingly remind them, and I did try to give assistants credit in the media,
Yeah.
in certain cases, that they had a late game adjustment or something like that and try to give them credit. But I would also joke that when we had those conversations about, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to go back and forth? That, like you said, when we walk out, this is how we're going to do it because I'll be the one taking the heat for it.
Yeah.
Nobody really goes after the assistants after losses. So, because I've been there too, it was nice not being there. And I remember uh, a long time ago, a friend of my dad's. My dad would always say, "Yep." John Tierney would always tell me that the toughest move in coaching is it's not up the ladder, it's 12 inches over into the next seat. And he was pretty much right. You didn't have seats out there on the football field, but maybe it was the headset, whatever you wore. Moving there from the assistant to the head coach is a big deal. But so yes, I think, and that was the thing in our coaches huddle this morning. The big word that came up was loyalty. We knew that as assistants because all of us had started there, and as head coaches, that's what we want.
Yeah, you want to be able to walk alongside the head coach and be able to support the head coach. Because ultimately, again, you're all in the same endeavor together, and being able to do whatever, as long as it's moral or ethically correct, like you want to be able to do
Mhm.
whatever you can to support that vision. Because again, like if you're not all pulling in the same direction, it's pretty tough to expect your team to do that. And then in general, like within your staff, if you're not pulling in the same direction, it's just it can get very complicated and messy right away. So being loyal is such an important trait, and I think when you see staffs that have been intentionally relational, that have been around together, you almost always see loyalty as the number one characteristic that it kind of defines that group. And typically those staffs are pretty successful in whatever they might be coaching.
Exactly. So, no, those were a couple of fun episodes, and obviously we had the personal connection to those guests each week. And who knows? I think maybe there's some ideas to incorporate those coaching bonds and those roles as assistant and head coach in some future episodes as well, and maybe even a little bit different format. So we'll see. But we do appreciate you joining us for Inside the Huddle with Three Rivers FCA for this episode. And we do appreciate our guests for carrying us each episode and continuing to do this. But until next time, everybody take care with the holidays coming up. We wish you all the blessings in the world. So thanks again.
Yeah, happy holidays. And if you could, don't forget to like or subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or Spotify. And have a very happy Thanksgiving, guys.
Thanks for watching this episode of Inside the Huddle with Three Rivers FCA. If you have ideas for content or interview suggestions, just reach out to Tom or Andrew. Thanks again for checking out Inside the Huddle with Three Rivers FCA.